Washington State University. Go Cougs!
Welcome back to our course on collecting smartphone sensor data using iOS. We're in Module 2, where we're learning how to collect and display the sensor data on the device. In Part 5 of this module, we'll be looking at more of the core location framework, specifically on how to receive updates when the location changes. Now, to do that, we have to use a new programming paradigm in iOS called delegation. So delegation is simply a way to send messages from one module to another in iOS. In our case, the location manager that manages the location services is going to be sending messages to apps that require the location information, like our sensor app. So when the message arrives, iOS needs to know where to send it. And so that's the job of the delegate. The delegate says, I am the one to send these messages to, and I have the methods implemented to handle those messages. Specifically, the messages that we'll be wanting to handle are when a location update is available, we want to receive a message. If an error has occurred, we'll want to receive a message. And if the user has changed the authorization to the location services, we want to be notified of that as well. So more generally, a delegate is a class that conforms to a certain protocol. And a protocol is a collection of properties and methods that a particular class will conform to. So in our case, the protocol that we want our class to conform to is called the core location manager delegate. That delegate or that protocol defines several methods that can be called. Two of the methods in particular we're interested in are the did update locations and did fail with error. Those are the two main methods that will be called when the location services has something to say to us. Now, we also need to choose which class is going to serve as that delegate. In other words, where are those methods going to be defined? And in our case, since our app is fairly simple, we're going to actually make our view controller class also adhere to this protocol. And so we'll define the methods within our view controller class. And then when we tell the location manager that our view controller class is our delegate, then any messages from the location services will be sent to our view controller class. So within the code, the way we implement this is first, whichever class we want to serve as the delegate, we add this protocol designator to the inheritance of the class. So in our case, in our viewcontroller.swift file, we want our viewController class to be the delegate for the location services. So we add the protocol name to this inheritance list of our class. The other thing that we need to do is to tell the location manager where the delegate is. So we've already created an instance of the location manager, but the step that we need to add is setting the delegate of that location manager to self. What that means is that the delegate is in fact this class, the very class that it is being allocated in. So self is just a designator for the current class instance. So that will tell the location manager where to send these messages, but then we have to actually implement the methods to handle those messages. Now, none of these methods do we have to implement. They're not required, but of course we generally want to be able to handle these updates and errors and do something specific to our app and not just whatever the generic method is that's already implemented. So we're going to implement these two methods. Again, these are part of the protocol. We did update locations. As you can see, it takes a location manager and an array of locations. Now, the documentation tells us that this array, the last element of the array, is actually the most recent location update. So for that reason, we're going to grab the last element of the array using the last property of the array. And we're also told in the documentation that this array will always contain at least one location entry. And so we're confident that we can unwrap this or make it explicit because it will not be nil. And that way we don't have to unwrap it later. So we have our location information. Now to access the latitude and longitude, there is another property of location called coordinate. And then the coordinate has the two properties, latitude and longitude. So that's where we'll get that information from. And for altitude, altitude is just a property of the location itself, and so we access the altitude just off of the location. Also note that we're using this technique we saw before so that we don't have a really long, high precision floating point number displayed on our screen. This technique is creating a string from these floating point numbers, but limiting them to 3 decimal places. So this will create the 3 strings that hold the numeric number for the location data. And then we want to set the labels on our view to update their text fields accordingly. And so here we're creating the strings to set for our labels, and we're using this technique using the / parenthetical to insert the strings we just created into these larger strings, and then that will wind up updating the values that we see on the display. And then for the handling the errors, again, if some error occurs and it's not able to produce a location, again, since the location will never be nil, instead this error method will be called. In our case, we're just going to print out whatever that error message is to the console. But of course, in a real app, you may want to adapt or react to different types of errors, especially if something goes wrong and location services is not able to determine its location. Okay, now before we add this code to our app, I want to say one more thing about testing. It turns out that the iOS simulator does in fact support a simulation of the location services and a GPS sensor. And the way we're going to access that is once the simulator starts up, you'll note that if we click on the debug menu option for the simulator and go down to location, we can choose various types of location simulations. Of course, we can put in a custom location. We can use the location of Apple headquarters, and there are also various types of movement, a bicycle ride, a run, and a freeway drive. So we'll be checking the freeway drive, and that way we'll see some fairly frequent updates to the latitude and longitude. For this simulator, the altitude will remain 0. It doesn't simulate altitude. And also remember that our motion information will remain 0 because the simulator does not simulate the motion sensors. But for now, we'll just be using the simulator to demonstrate the location updates. Okay, well, let's go into Xcode. So I'll get out of my presentation, start up Xcode, and load our app. Okay, so here is our sensor app, and in previous parts, of course, we've already added in some of the location handling by initializing the location and these calls to start and stop, which are initiated by the tapping of start and stop on the display. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go up to the top, and we're going to conform our view controller class to the location manager delegate. And that's the first suggestion there, so I'll take that one. And then, of course, we need to tell the location manager that this is in fact our delegate. So we'll do that when we create it down here in the initialize location. Right after we create the location manager, we are going to set its delegate to self. So now any messages from the location manager will be routed to this instance of this class. And so now this is where we want to add in our code to handle those messages. So let me go back to our presentation, and I'm going to copy this code and then back into Xcode. I'll just put it right here. And a few spurious spaces there. Okay, so there's our did update locations, which will update our display as new locations come in. And then, of course, if we have an error, it'll be caught by this did fail with error method. All right, so let's start up the simulator and see these location updates. Okay, so before we start it up, let's go over to, as I said, the debug location. We see that the freeway drive is checked, so we'll use that one. We'll start up our sensors, and here you see that it is getting the location information, and we should see it updating. There it goes. We see an update every once in a while. I guess our freeway drive is not quite into high speed yet. But as you can see, the latitude and longitude are updating periodically. Perhaps you might want to add a little bit more precision instead of just 3 decimal places, so you can see it update a little more often. But that's our location updates, and so that pretty much completes our app in terms of displaying the sensor information. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that and exit our simulator and get back into the notes. Okay, so in this part we've seen how to do delegation. So again, a delegate is something that handles a certain set of messages that iOS sends, and in this case it's the messages from the location manager. We saw how to use that to update the location information on our display and handle errors, and of course made the appropriate updates to our sensor app. So the last piece of our sensor app in terms of displaying information is to handle the possibility that the user might change the authorization for the location services. So we need to be able to handle that occurrence as well. So we'll be looking at that in part 6.